Open Your Eyes is brought to you by the Belize Bank. Our country, your bank.
Welcome to Open Your Eyes.
Start your morning right.
I'm Marlene Cuellar.
And I'm Isana Cayetano.
And thank you for joining us this morning.
Why does it sound like you're under the weather, Marlene?
I
My
am
spider
a
senses
bit,
tell me you're getting sick.
Well, you know, I was hoping my voice would show up today, but it doesn't seem like it wants to cooperate so much. But mentally, I'm here at least.
Okay. But don't feel bad. A lot of people are under the weather recently. I guess it's because of the change in temperatures and the northerlies and stuff like that.
We're tropical people. We're not used to the chill. Okay, well, we're going to check in on the weather, though. We have Crystal Rosales on the line. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
How are you today, Crystal?
I'm great, thank you.
All right. So we're talking about the chill that we were getting used to last week. What's the forecast for today?
Well, we're expecting sunny skies with a few cloudy spells today and clear to partly cloudy tonight.
Okay.
Showers will be isolated.
And or winds?
The winds will be from the east to northeast at 5 to 15 knots.
All right. And how are things out at sea?
It's going to be slight to light chop.
All right. And or high temperatures, is it creeping back up to the warmer side?
Yes, it is. We're gonna reach. It's gonna reach 86 degrees Fahrenheit along the coast, 89 degrees Fahrenheit inland, and 78 degrees Fahrenheit in the hills.
And tonight?
Tonight will be 77 degrees Fahrenheit along the coast, 70 degrees Fahrenheit inland, and 66 degrees Fahrenheit in the hills.
Okay. And what about the extended forecast?
For Tuesday is for mainly fair conditions with a chance of isolated showers increasing late Tuesday night.
So we have some rains ahead by midweek?
Excuse me?
We'll have some rains ahead by midweek?
Yes, by Wednesday.
Okay. All right. And last leg of the hurricane season, is there anything that looks like it wants to form or may possibly threaten us?
No tropical cyclone formation isn't expected in the North Atlantic, the Caribbean Sea, or the Gulf of Mexico.
All right. That's great news. Well, thank you very much for that update.
You're welcome.
You have a great day today.
And you as well.
All right.
Well, I guess it's safe to say that we are clear of any and all tropical storm hurricane formations this past season. I mean, it's only a few days left, but there's nothing on the horizon, so we're home safe.
That is very true. I know last week Sebastian really kind of reminded us all that we are still in the hurricane season, but nonetheless, everyone seems to have been spared from that.
Yeah.
And for now, we're still in the clear. So seems like it would have been 2019 hurricane season. We would have been blessed once again.
Yeah.
But we are going to shift gears now, Isani, for a bit of Monday motivation. All right. And that means our eye opener, which is taken from dailyom.com. Goes like this. Having a pity party for yourself is all right, as long as you learn from it and don't dwell in it for long periods of time. We all have days when the bad things seem to outweigh the good ones, and we begin to think that life isn't fair. You get stuck in traffic, which means you're late for an important meeting, and then your car gets towed. You might ask yourself, why me? Events like this one can test anyone's ability to be grateful and feel optimistic. If you have a tendency to feel sorry for yourself, and many of us do, things usually progress to the next stage, the pity party. You begin to feel like the innocent victim of a dismal fate because you're seeing your life through inaccurate lenses. Most of the thoughts that run through your mind at times like these are not helpful. And they mainly serve to increase your indignation and feelings of powerlessness. What these feelings and thoughts don't do is change your circumstances or make you feel better. Try not to dwell on unpleasant experiences and do everything you can to avoid holding on to negative emotions. When you indulge in self-pity, you only make a bad day worse. Stop feeling sorry for yourself, release the notion that you are a victim, and notice the good that exists in your life.
I'll be the first to say that I've never been a fan of, and I've never really, gotten into the idea of the pity party. Right? Things happen, good and bad. We all have great days. We all have the worst experiences in the course of the day. And I am someone, I take the good with the bad. Yeah. I appreciate when I'm on a streak and things happen to fall in place fairly easily, as I would call it clockwork. But I also acknowledge that not every day the same set of circumstances will yield the same results. Yeah. Things are dynamic in my life. So therefore, getting stuck in traffic and being late for that meeting, that proverbial meeting, I tell myself, you know what? Let me find the good that comes out of this. Yeah. I wouldn't complain or sulk because I've long since learned that doing so doesn't really help. And people don't care. Like for me to sit here and tell you, this is what happened to me this morning and I don't know how I do this afternoon, nobody wants to hear that. It's a matter of accepting that, you know what, it has happened. Yeah. Let me be proactive in attempting to change the course of what happens thereafter. Yeah. That comes with a strong sense of self-esteem, however. Yeah. I think those two are intricately connected.
No, absolutely. And I think that where you're at is where a lot of people kind of need to work towards. You know, naturally, and you said it, we all have bad days and we all have bad things happen to us. And they're on a scale in terms of how bad they are, but you can't necessarily predict how it's going to affect people. I mean, the day you're late could just be, you know, the final issue that makes it a devastating moment for you because a lot of other things have gone wrong. Maybe the kids are sick, you can't pay rent, you know, there's so many things that people carry with them. But I do love what you said in terms of how do you change it. Yeah. And whether or not you have people who will listen to you when you're in a tough time, that's one thing, because you do need to find people close to you that if it gets really hard, that you can at least turn to them. They won't fix your problem. They probably can't. Even if they give you advice, you probably won't take it. But the point is that you can unload it somewhere. What I think is key in the eye-opener is reminding yourself that you don't want to stay there. You know, you don't want to wake up every morning saying, oh, there's the dark cloud over my head, it's not going to go anywhere. You know, being kind of the, do you remember Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore in life? Everything happens to you. It's about being able to acknowledge that, yes, things are bad now. And what can I learn from this? What can I do to change it? And what little steps can I make to pull myself out of that? And I think that's the key part. So the pity party, if that's something that you do, if you've willing listeners, great. But just don't stay there. That isn't the party that goes on all night. You want to just drop in and keep on moving after that. And if you really find yourself struggling for an extended period of time in that down spot, then it is time to get some help as well. And you have to acknowledge that.
I think also, Marlene, one of the key takeaways from the eye-opener this morning is the fact that optimism comes from within. Yeah. When you're faced with a situation that adversely affects your state of mind or your state of being, physically or otherwise, it is up to you to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, right?
Yeah.
But that comes from telling yourself that, as you rightfully said, this isn't where I want to be.
Yeah.
So I have to do everything. It's incumbent upon me to do everything to change the way how the situation unfolds. Yeah. And that, like I said, has to do with a strong sense of understanding oneself and being able to say, you know what, I am able to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that is our Monday motivation for today. We hope that it's helped you in some way, whether you are in the midst of a pity party or perhaps struggling with something today. And I'm pretty sure everybody's struggling. It's Monday morning. It's always a tough day to get things started.
Look, it's Monday, man. We don't have time for pity parties, right? Don't send out any invitations. Get up, get out, and change the course of the way things are happening.
Nicely said. All right. Well, we got to keep with the course of the show. And that means that it is a Monday morning, and we're going to check in on some of the major stories from over the weekend and what lies ahead for this week. So let's shift gears to the Eye on the News.
All right, Marlene. So there are two things we want to focus on today that happened over the course of the weekend. And of course, extensive coverage will be given to both of these incidents. The first I want to touch on is the disappearance of a group of fishermen who went to sea a couple days ago. It just so happens, Marlene, believe it or not, that these individuals are persons who live within my neighborhood. They are my neighbors in a manner of speaking. And so I'm very familiar with them as seagoers. When word came out on Saturday that these men were unaccounted for, it isn't because family and friends of these individuals, Sheldon included, haven't made a concerted effort to try to locate them.
Yeah.
And sadly, it brings to mind the incident a few months ago where bodies began washing up along the shores of Belize City. I am not saying that this is the fate of these gentlemen. I'm sincerely hoping that that is not the case.
Yeah.
However, a search continues to try to locate the individuals. Again, with every moment that passes by, the chances of finding them in good health or alive in this case is narrower and narrower, right? So that is the first thing. And so
there was a body that washed up on Friday, wasn't it? Is it linked at all?
I am not certain.
Okay.
Police would have to be able to make that determination. What they have issued nonetheless is the following report. On Saturday, November 23rd, 2019, at around 10:30 a.m., Loretta Gibson, 26 years old, a Belizean domestic of Raleigh Street, reported that her brother, Sheldon Gibson, 22 years old, a Belizean fisherman, went fishing on his white 18-foot fiberglass boat named Loriani, equipped with a 40-horsepower engine. They were in the vicinity of Map Key. On November 22nd, and up to the time of making her report, this should have been on November 24th, and up to the time of making her report, he has not been seen or heard from. Initial investigation revealed that Sheldon Gibson, Elijah Usher, and another unknown male person went on board the Loriani to Map Key for the day, and neither persons have been seen or heard from since. So as I mentioned before, there is this ominous feeling that perhaps something has happened. But that cannot be confirmed as yet because there is a search party that is actively out there trying to locate these gentlemen.
When did they go out to sea?
They went to sea on the 22nd.
Which was Friday. Yeah. Wasn't
And
that
it was
the
only
rainy
for
day
the day.
too?
Yeah, it was raining off and on Friday, right? Again, it was a day trip. So they were expected to return perhaps in the afternoon or sometime in the evening. And when they did not show up, that's when, you know, the family became concerned. And the way things work is that a certain time or a certain length of time has to elapse before you're able to make a missing persons report. And so I believe that it was at the end of that particular period that they lodged this formal missing persons complaint. All right, so we're still a bit optimistic that perhaps these men may have either faced mechanical issues and are drifting. We're hoping for the best. That was the first incident that came to light on Saturday, Marlene. The second was on Saturday night, and I believe this is one that, you know, for all intents and purpose, has left the business community shocked. More so the Asian community in Belize, right? We're talking about a well-known proprietor. He's a principal of one of the bigger businesses on the south side of Belize City. And it became clear sometime after 9 o'clock on Saturday night that there had been a fatal shooting. And this incident happened not too far from Old Belize, along the George Price Highway. And so that when names became available to us, we learned then that this individual is a well-known Chinese businessman. And again, on the surface of it, it seemed as if though he may have been lured to his death, considering the fact that the police report indicates that he had received a call of a friend of his who had suffered mechanical problems with his vehicle along the highway. And I guess it could happen to any of us where we are responding to persons that we know to come to their aid, and you come and meet your fate, essentially, right? The police report has it such that on Saturday around 9 o'clock, they responded to a shooting incident near Old Belize, and on arrival, they saw the lifeless body of Zheng Liu, a businessman of Central American Boulevard, with an apparent gunshot wound to the body. It says here, police investigation revealed that Liu was at work when he was called out to the area near Old Belize by a close associate who claimed to have broken down in a vehicle and needed assistance to be towed into the city. Upon his arrival at the location, he was met by that close associate and two other male persons, one of whom shot him. His body was thrown out of his vehicle and the suspects drove off in it. Quick police response resulted in the vehicle being intercepted on Holy Emmanuel Street, and two suspects were detained. Several valuable evidence have been collected and police investigation continue. Right? And so it goes on to say the body of Liu was not bound and the vehicle found on the scene belonged to one of the suspects and not him. Right? So again, all indications are that Mr. Liu is one of the principals of 88 Shopping Center. As I mentioned earlier, it's one of the bigger businesses on that side of the city. And for most of us who are familiar with that Central American Penn Road intersection, those are businesses on all four corners, including the shopping plaza that was fairly recently built. And there's ongoing construction there as well. And so these are persons who are contributing to local business. And so it's a blow, considering the fact that here is this young person who is very much involved, and to be lured to one's death in such a manner is unfortunate. One quick thing before I allow you to jump in here, Marlene, is the fact that it seems that the police were fairly quick in their response to try to apprehend the suspects in this matter, and the fact that the vehicle was found in the Holy Emmanuel Gongolong area.
You know, I think definitely beyond the Asian community, it's a murder that has affected a lot of people across the country, especially I want to say in the community where the businesses exist. It is clearly strange circumstances, you know, being called out to help a friend and then that being where you are murdered. That's just a crazy story in itself. The 88 stores and chain of stores in that area are well trafficked. These people are well known. Community people, I mean, anybody who passes that area at any hour, you see the amount of activity. So they are well known to the community there. But really strange circumstances, and I hope we can get some clear answers as to what's happening there.
Well, some of the questions that I had, I mean, that came to mind immediately upon actually getting a hand on the formal report is whether or not this so-called close associate placed that call under duress by the other two persons or the other individuals that were with him, or was this part of a conspiracy to call him out and dispose of him in that manner. So it's something that the investigators are looking into. Again, like I said,
and the motive, because they didn't say
they haven't been able to ascertain a motive. The work is there for them to get to the bottom of. They have suspects in their custody, and let's see where it goes from there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but those are the two major incidents that we're looking at over the course of the weekend that we will provide coverage of, and other stories as well later in the news at 6:30.
All right, great. So that's it for us with the Eye on the News. And we are back, of course, keeping moving with our show for today. And Isani, we have a very interesting morning tea for you to weigh in on. First of all, I want to acknowledge that today, November 25th, is actually the start of what is known as the 16 Days of Activism. And our show is actually going to be themed around that. We'll be having an extensive conversation about gender-based violence. But we wanted to chime in on something that if you've been paying attention to U.S. media especially, you would have heard this story and maybe had some thoughts as well, and we're giving you a space to be able to talk about it as well. So, you know rapper T.I., right?
Fan of his, admittedly.
Absolutely. No, nothing wrong with that. His music is his music.
Yes.
But whether you're a fan of his parenting skills is a different story. So recently, T.I. was on a radio show, and he was talking about his children and his fathering style and how he works, how he tries to, or his style of parenting. Let me put it that way. So he says he goes to the gynecologist with his daughter every single year on her birthday to ensure that her hymen is intact. And it has definitely sparked an absolute outrage. It is a conversation, I think, that has been divisive as well. Some people have said
very much
they
divisive.
Support. Some people have clearly drawn the line and said that is too far. So what are your thoughts in his, and I'm not just saying you, Isani, but in general. It's a conversation to be had about how we view girls, about what the role of a parent is. A number of different issues jump out to me, but you go ahead.
This is an interesting one. I've been following it since last week when I first saw it in the social media space. In my mind, I'm thinking perhaps if it's the mother who goes along with her to the gynecologist, perhaps you get a pass. But for the male parent, the father in this case, to take his daughter and make sure that she remains intact, so to speak, in my opinion, is a bit intrusive. I don't know, like certain things I would do with my daughter, other things I reserve that for her mom. And so personally, I don't see myself in that space. If I want her to remain a virgin until she's comfortable, then yes, I'll support the idea of celibacy, if that is the case, abstinence until you reach a certain age where you decide that that's what you want to do, then that's fine. But for me to say, well, okay, today is your 19th birthday, let's go to the doctor. I don't know, I think that's a bit extreme. I think it's way out there, right? As you said, this matter has been a very polemic one. People are torn based on what they're prepared to do and how far they're prepared to go, and other people don't even want to touch it based on the fact that it evokes a lot of strong feelings where parenting, perhaps there should be a line drawn somewhere. And in the aftermath of it, his daughter, because of the social media wildfire that has happened, has unfollowed her dad, you know? And I think that's embarrassing for her to be put in that kind of a spotlight. I mean, even if that's what you've been doing for the past 20 years, to put that out there on national radio in that space, I think for anybody I'd crawl under a rock if that were me.
I know. Well, it infuriated me, and I'll say it, and that's the lightest word that I could choose. And not because I'm a woman, just the whole thought behind it. First of all, let's just get a bit of science out of the way. The hymen is not necessarily something you can tie to virginity. First of all, some women are born without hymens. Secondly, it can break in any kind of activity, not just sexual activity.
You do
so that's
sports
the first
and that sort
thing,
of stuff you do.
Right? So imagine this poor girl had gone to the gynecologist one time and the hymen was broken and she didn't have sex, the issue that would have become. Secondly, I'm going to say it, I think that this is actually, if not a precursor to abuse, it could be considered abuse. Not because she's a child means she's not privy to her privacy, one. Sexual and reproductive health rights are real. And as a father, you can always wish the best for your child, but what you do, or as a parent, what you do is raise them to make the best decisions.
Precisely what I was
Not necessarily to hover over them and to, what is the threat here? What is, let's move further to intent. His physical presence at a gynecologist in checking this very private matter of his daughter. Let's say she was 17, not an adult. What is the intent if the results are not what he would have liked? And that's for me where I am. You are there for a reason. That's a threat in itself. And so I do see it as a form of abuse. I think it also goes very, because I've read some of the other information too, clearly, because I was so infuriated by it, that he doesn't have the same standard for his sons. That it's okay if his
because
sons...
there's always this double standard where boys and girls are concerned. And
but
sadly, we all,
okay.
at some point or the other, conform to that double standard.
No, we don't all.
No. I mean, I'm saying not necessarily in this particular case, but I'm saying like sometimes we set a certain standard or a bar for our daughter that we don't set for our son, or for our son that we don't set for our daughter. And I'm saying to you, we all fall into that trap depending on what the situation is. But I think this one is way too extreme. If you're going to do it for her and not do it for him,
the
then
principle
there's that
behind
disparity.
it, though, the principle behind it, because you know, it's such a deep issue if you think about it. And I think the reason, I mean, he's been, let's be clear, there are people who've said, go for you, these are the type of fathers you need. So there are people who think this is okay, but it goes back to how we view women.
Can
you
I
know,
venture?
her value is not diminished if she'd engaged in sexual activity before her 18th birthday. And it didn't diminish for his sons. So why is it given such a high priority? I think what needs to be, or for me, what I think it highlights is showing how, as much as time has passed and the women's movement and gender equality and all these things have come to the forefront, there's still behavioral and thought patterns that we need to break ourselves free from. And I'm not saying give children a free license to go out there with reckless abandon. I'm saying that it goes back to teaching decision making and establishing a value system rather than resorting to behaviors like these. But that's just my view on it. That's how I see it.
Can I venture to say this, and I'll try to find the most politically correct way of approaching it. It's also a sensitive topic. It has been for a number of years a conversation that is being held that is rather taboo, but you know, when you have that one-on-one with persons around the water cooler, at times it does come up. You have teenagers, girls who attend these all-girls high schools, where some parents are rigid in terms of dealing with their daughters, that where it concerns the issue of sex and sexuality, there's not necessarily a discussion, but there is, you won't do this, and you won't be caught doing this, so to speak. And while they're, in this case, their hymen or their virginity, if you want to equate the two, although you've made that
No,
distinction.
hymen does not equal.
Yeah, I know. I know. Most people, in a manner of thinking, colloquially put one and one together, right? But if you're looking at it from that point of view, so the virginity remains intact, but that does not say that they're not sexually active otherwise. And so if he, and I'm just going out on a limb here, if perhaps he is thinking, okay, well, the fact that the hymen remains intact is an indication that she's not sexually active, then he has it wrong. Based on the same.
It wrong in checking
Yeah. I know. We've established that. But I'm saying if in his mind he's thinking, look, this is my way of ensuring that she's not sexually active, then brother, you have it all wrong.
Well, like we said, it's caused a whole lot of stir. We brought it into the conversation this morning because this is a good time to have it. We're talking about gender-based violence, and we're talking about issues very similar to this. I have to be honest, too, that the hosts who were a part of the radio show actually came under a lot of fire, too, because they snickered when he said it. And so they had to issue an apology. I know they lost some business as a result of it, because that's just to show how sensitive this issue is and how grave it is to be able to.
But that's a tough one, Marlene. I understand. Please, I understand fully. If you, as the host of a show, are not prepared for what a guest is about to say next, and that catches you completely off guard, then how do you determine what your initial reaction is to what is being said or done? I'll just leave that there.
No, I don't leave it there. I'll tell you this much.
Because I don't know what I would have said or done at that point.
I can't predict what I'll say either, but I think that that's part of the responsibility that we hold when we are on air. Because laughing especially, and I understand sometimes people laugh because they're uncomfortable, but you could have followed it up and say something as a result of it, and that's just the responsibility that we hold. But it has been an interesting conversation. Go ahead and weigh in. There is no right or wrong answer here. I think it's just being able to look at our views, understand our views, and perhaps dive into it and see why this affects us the way it does. But that is our morning tea for today. It sounds like it has a bit of hot sauce in it too. All right, we got to get moving into our conversation this morning. And we're starting off with a panel discussion on gender-based violence. Today is the kickstart of 16 days of activism. We have a very diverse panel joining us, and so we're going to have an extended conversation with them.
And then our second and final segment is on International Finance Service Commission, capital market capital market development in Belize. So that has to do with finances and the international
stock
space.
Exchange.
And those of you interested in that may want to stick around for it.
All right, so that's our lineup for today. We're going to go ahead and take a break. And before we do, we got the birthday shout out. And so we're saying happy birthday to...
We are saying happy birthday to Faye Butler Neal. There she is, already Christmased up.
Enjoy your day. And with that, we're going to go ahead and take a break. And we'll be back in a few. Stay tuned.
With over 100 years of service excellence
And welcome back. We are now entering our first segment of the show this morning. And as we said prior to the commercial break, today is the kickoff of the 16 days of activism. It is that time in November where we pay close attention. All right, and that being said, we have with us Dr. Charmaine Sanders, who's in the middle. She's the president of Haven House. And to her right is the executive director of the National Women's Commission, none other than Cynthia Williams. And of course, to the far end is our good friend Amy Jex, a counselor. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
16 days of activism and focus on gender-based violence. We do this every year to raise awareness on that particular issue. And it's a perennial and an ongoing concern of ours in our society. Where do we begin from this year? What do we have on the table for us to kickstart our 16 days?
Well, 16 days actually, it's an opportunity to refocus, it's an opportunity to strengthen, to engage people that might otherwise not be engaged throughout the year, and to make new connections. I think particularly this year with the theme from awareness to accountability, unmasking the many faces of violence, it provides a space for us to expand the conversation, because a lot of times people speak about gender-based violence, but in their minds they only see domestic violence. And so it's important though for us to be able to continuously try to re-engage people and help them understand, because when we look at issues of gender-based violence, it's something that it is not only for families or it's only for interpersonal relationships between men and women, but it's something that affects communities. And I think it's that conversation that we need to be able to have. Sometimes it's uncomfortable conversations that we don't have. And I think this year it's really a challenge that we are taking out to the public, to the wider public. And with the theme is really looking at everybody's role, not only the role of some of us who work within the sector, but every single person that has lived, had experienced or not gender-based violence.
Now, when we talk about gender-based violence, I know you clearly said it, that the first thought is domestic violence, but it's also, the first thought is a woman as the victim. But there's a very specific reason you use gender-based violence, because it includes men as well, right?
Yes.
Now, with that out of the way, one of the things I wanted to look at is just taking stock of where we are. What kind of data do we have to really be able to understand as a baseline how we're doing in this country, how severe the problem is?
Our data, at least I have data from I think we started to actually register our victims that come to the house, the shelter. And from 1993 to 2018, we had 384 women and 865 children. Now, those are persons who stayed with us. Over the years, though, we've had over 1,200 women who came to us in emergency situations. So one of our strongest advocacy points is to ensure that we tell women how to do their exit plans. And that exit plan means there's an exit strategy in the case of an emergency. So they've already planned with their neighbors or their close friends how they will exit and come to us. And it may not be for the full 21 days that our residents stay with us. So those are our figures. And we also included in our strategic plan community outreach, because domestic violence is still very much taboo. It's not spoken about. And when we did our review, we realized too that we need to start from the beginning. So a lot of our programmatic areas focuses on dating violence. That's a start. On Saturday, we had a awareness raising event, which is called our 5K Color Run, a rather successful event. And what makes it more prideful for us is that we're seeing a lot of the younger people participating. Yes, it's a fun activity, and they may be amazed by the color and the powder. It kind of gives that sense of excitement. But it's also an opportunity for us to share. And we try to focus with the young people on dating violence, because that essentially can be where the problem starts.
As it relates, I think, to, and that's, I think, continues to be a challenge in Belize, as in many other Caribbean countries, the fact that we have not really established prevalence. And so we do have data on reported cases through the National Gender-Based Violence system, where any responder, any first responder dealing with any case of gender-based violence, and I say gender-based violence because it's not only domestic violence, it also includes sexual violence, sexual assaults as well. It also includes sexual violence, particularly children, and abuse of children. And so when it comes to that, we've been having some of that data. So the records that show that usually every year it ranges between 1,500 to over 2,000 cases, usually, and every year. There's like a decrease sometimes, and another year it goes up again. However, one of the things that we are working on is through the Belize Crime Observatory, looking at how do we begin ensuring that the data that is collected is much more structured. And so for us to then be able to use that for policy decisions. So the National Women's Commission, as an advisory body to government on issues of gender equality, that's one of the areas that we're trying to work on, and being able to look at what are the areas, because we know what are the limitations and what are the gaps. And so how do we strengthen those areas? Because we know that in many instances, not all the first-time responders actually document those cases. And so we don't really have the data to say this is the number. There was a pilot survey that was done back in 2015 through the UN Trust Fund project that looked at two specific areas, Stank Creek and Orange Walk. And so in there, they were able to look at how many women experienced violence in terms at one point in their lives. So we definitely, that's one of the areas, that's one of the gaps that we need to be able to work on. And currently we're trying to see what are the spaces that we can utilize. What was the indication
in that particular case?
In that case, it was between 2 to 3 women have experienced violence at one point in their lives. And so, you know, it really requires a lot of funding for us to really invest in terms of national survey or a study that allows us to have much clearer picture and more concrete data. However, we do have ways of collecting, but sometimes what happens is that we might not be collecting, or we might not be necessarily asking the necessary questions to be able to say, this is what we have. And so definitely we recognize that as a challenge, and to be able to then bring the different partners that work together and be able to then say, you as an agency collect this data, the other agency collects that, how do we group it and be able to get a clearer picture?
Now, you know, I asked the question about data because I think it's also, you know, there's responding to gender-based violence, which is where you look at the police, we look at agencies that you know, Charmaine represents. But then there's also trying to understand the root of it and what we can do to circumvent the problem from taking place within households. Maybe that recognizing very early signs that a person may have a tendency to exhibit abusive behavior, or a person may have the tendency to allow abusive behavior. How do you go about, because I know you have year-round activities, and I know you talk with people all the time who come in difficult situations. What are some of the things that perhaps we need to start to mentally focus on with the younger generation, and even within ourselves if we haven't found ourselves in an abusive relationship?
I think the first thing we have to look for is just putting these things out there, having more awareness of what violence is, of what gender-based violence is, because what you spoke about in the beginning is very true. We see a lot of these things and we're so accustomed to it that we become jaded to it. So it's very important to start the conversation that certain things are not appropriate. One of the main indicators that we see is that we have experienced, maybe our parents or our neighbors. We hear the screaming, we hear the fear, and it's just what happens next door, what happens in the house, and this is normalized. So if I grew up my entire life seeing violence, then when it occurs to me, it's normal. And that is a truth in our society. It happens all over the world, not just in Belize. So it's very important to have these conversations. Like you said, it's a perennial issue, to keep it in the news and to keep the awareness going, so that whenever we encounter things like control issues, then we can start to place these control issues and see if it does relate to violence, if it does relate to, because to other things, because we see it as maybe abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. But what about financial abuse? When do we talk about that? If you have the money in the household and I make my own money, but when I have my own money, you're still in charge of paying all the bills and everything, so I have to give it to you. How do I formulate my exit plan? How do I formulate a safety plan?
Yeah.
When do I start saving my own money? When do I start making sure that I feel independent? It has to do with our self-esteem as well. It has to do with a lot of things wrapped up in where do we want our relationship? Is there respect in my relationship? And do I feel like I have a place in it?
Yeah.
Let's go back a bit. I'll go with an observation I think is commonplace here. In our society, you can say that for the most part, we're all interfering, right? You want to know what's happening with the next person. And so in an instance where there's the yelling and the screaming and the physical violence that you described, most of us would want to know or go by and say, hey, well, Amy and man made a fight. But it doesn't dawn to us, you know what? Let's call the police. Let's get somebody else involved because there's something happening there. It's more that you could say afterwards, girl, you may know so and so happened, as opposed to, you know, approaching it from the point that there is something happening that requires an intervention.
It ties in, and that's why I think we chose the particular theme, because it ties into the issue of accountability and a lack of seeing ourselves as having a responsibility or towards our neighbors, and a sense that we are also responsible for protection when it comes to children as well. And so it definitely speaks about taking it beyond. Important to keep that awareness, important to be able to bring the understanding of people to a higher level of what it really is. But how do we move from there? And I think that's the important step that we need. And slowly we're taking it. But I think this is where we need to have a more cohesive approach and be able to be more integrative in the things that we do. Because what often happens is we work in isolation. Sometimes everybody is doing all their different responses and their interventions, but it's because of the amount and the level of work that is required, we don't get that space and time to sit back and say, okay, this is what I found. It can inform what you are doing. And that way, then we can maybe come up with interventions that engage people at a higher level and say, you know what, as a citizen of Belize, as a citizen of Belize City, you have a personal responsibility to also report these cases. It's a moral responsibility. I mean, we are a very moral country. We are a very moral society. We speak about faith. And so when we talk about faith, we also have to say, well, we are our brother's keepers. So I think those are the conversations that often we kind of separate in some instances, and we need to bring them together. Because if we don't engage everybody, no matter how much work all the organizations do, it will still not be able to move beyond that.
And I think that's you know, what you're saying is important in terms of, I'm looking at Charmaine's situation where you would take women and their families when they're fleeing for their lives, essentially. And I'm sure they've shared many stories. They've probably had police encounters, neighbors or family intervening. What do you find to be the spark that makes them finally make the decision to break the cycle?
It's oftentimes an event that they feel that their children is at risk. They feel that the violence will then trickle, it will have a domino effect on the children, and that is what sparks them. But I also want to add from our statistics, 75% of our victims return to their situation. And maybe we have not spent enough time trying to figure out, because the structure that we have, we're not judgmental, and so they can return to us again. But we find that 75% of these women return. What is even a more serious implication and a double whammy in my view, sometimes they get out of the relationship, they're moving on, and when we track them, they end up with some serious illnesses. For example, we had a survivor who beat all odds, got out, got her children out, got them in school, and she was diagnosed with cancer. And so now she has a second battle. And then we're seeing that that is a trend, you know, that they get these diagnoses of terminal illnesses that whether or not there's a correlation between that, we really can't say. It's just how it has happened. And I think that is a double whammy. You fought your best fight, you're a survivor, and then you now have another battle that is out of your control as well.
That's an interesting.
If we look at the statistics that you shared earlier, between 1993 and 2018, that is what, 25 years?
Yes.
Okay. So over the past 25 years, you've had just about or upwards of 1,200 persons who came to Haven House on an emergency basis.
Yes.
And 380 some odd persons who had their strategy and they came and sought.
And they stayed.
And they stayed. Okay. Do you believe that perhaps the issue of pride, one, and two, the fact that gender-based violence, in a sense, is so very taboo that people suffer in silence and choose to do that rather than to expose what's really taking place in their lives or in their relationships, as to why they're not seeking the kind of assistance that they need? I ask that because 1,225 years seems nominal more than it is a reality that we know that is happening as we speak.
Absolutely. I think it's a composition of multiple factors. I'll tell you, for one, on our end, we are there only on a referral basis. And if you think about it, and right now in December, and there are some peak times that these incidences come to light. And I noticed particularly in December, September, in Easter, whenever Easter falls, I don't know if it's linked to drinking, I don't know what. But
and also financial crunch.
Yes, that's when we really have to have a guard up. And I go back to the referral process. You're referred to us, you don't come directly to us. And more now with social media, people want to come. I do a lot of the promotion of our Haven House on my personal page and the Haven House page. People come to my inbox all the time, and they're afraid. And it's more fear than pride. I don't think it's pride.
Yeah.
I honestly believe it's fear over pride. And when they come in the inbox, it hurts my heart to say, I have to refer you to women's department. You need to talk to this person first. And then I think about it and I said, if I'm in a situation that is scary, risky, why do I have, you know, personally, I can't even take up the mantle and take the person to the shelter because it's not our process.
Okay, so why is it established in such a manner that it has to be based on a referral as opposed to immediate access or relief?
I speak only for Haven House, and it's because of the way we get our funding. We have to account. You see how quickly you have linked the amount of years and my data being nominal. That's the reason we began to collect data. A lot of our work has to be outcome oriented. It's programmatic, it's linked to funding. The bigger fishes dictate how you collect your data. That process is dictated as well. So there's a lack of flexibility in terms, if I reach out to somebody, I can do that personally and bring that person to my house, but the safety net is not necessarily there. It then impacts the safety of my family too. Because I have friends who do this type of advocacy work, and they will take the women in, give them shelter, and that goes undocumented. But when you're in a system, they're all the I's have to be dotted, the T's have to be crossed, because at the end of the day, your data has to represent the work that you're doing as well.
And this is where it's important to be able to move beyond just the response. Because we need to be able to address what happens before. I don't think that we'll ever have enough resources at the government level. Even if we have all the NGOs here in Belize, we'll still not be able to have enough because people are not at that space. People have to be ready to be able to decide at one point, and we might never know exactly what makes them make the decision. For different people, it's different reasons. And that's the complexity of issues of gender-based violence. And so in terms of, and I don't want to focus only in terms of domestic violence, I want to be able to take the conversation farther than that, because it also speaks to why people also don't report sexual assault cases. It also speaks about families who willingly stand behind perpetrators of violence against their own children. The questions often that we ask is, why do women remain? Why do victims return? We have to ask the questions, why do batters batter? Why are people violent? And be able to then address that. When we look at issue of violence, it's about power and control. And so often when we have those incidents increasing, there are things that trigger perpetrators of violence to be able to exert their power and try to retain that control. And that's why you see incidents rising in specific moments. We have to look at other factors such as alcohol and the abuse of other drugs that are widespread in Belize. So definitely it's important to be able to make those linkages. And sometimes even agencies working in the sector do not make those linkages. And so we're, for the past at least year or so, I think more, we've been really trying to be able to look at what else needs to be done.
Yeah, that's my question, because the intervention work is expensive. It is. First of all, because you're giving people homes and everything else that comes along with it. It's based on an individual's choice to seek those services. It's not like a child for human development to come in and extract them. If it's an adult, you need to have them willingly come out. And so the intervention work is always going to be, as you said, under-resourced. You just won't be able to meet the needs. So what are some of the other areas that we're trying to meet people at? What are the preventative measures? What are the early flag measures? What are we doing to not have to focus solely on, when people start playing Russian roulette with their life, like, if I stay, will I live beyond another day?
One of the things that we're trying to do through the National Gender and Gender-Based Violence Committee, it's looking at bring all the different sectors together to look at how this impacts individually on issues of education, issues of health, issues of security. We also have representation of the non-governmental sector as well, the UN agencies. And so we're doing that to be able to look at then what are the messages that are being sent in all these different sectors that can keep people, you spoke about a person having a choice. Sometimes people don't have that choice. They don't have the options. And so in terms of what are we also doing, what are the messages that we're giving both men and women, that when they get into these relationships, they'll be unable to say, you know what, that is violence, that is control, and that is not healthy, and be able to step away. And so we are not providing those messages very early on to children. Like what Amy said, we've normalized violence to the most basic component, which is even with children. What do we tell girls? What do we tell boys in terms of how do we prioritize the needs? And so the issue of gender-based violence has to be done in so many levels. And so that is why often it is very difficult. You mentioned, in terms of awareness, often even in terms of the role of the media, the role of the church. And so it's like we're not really doing it to the best of what we can do.
May I ask an honest question here? When did control become a negative thing? And how far is control ought to go from it being having perhaps an authoritative or a supervisory role over a situation to versus manipulating altogether what the situation is?
I think you kind of clarified it there, because when we look at control, control is not necessarily a negative thing. You just have to be aware of respect in the relationship. So if you have control, let's look at it in a scenario of business, right? You have an employee, you are the boss. Are you a slave driver kind of boss? Or do your employees respect you and love you, and do they see that your work is balanced and everything is balanced out? It's the same thing in a relationship. It's the same thing in the schools. When we look at any kind of relationship, you want to see that the control is balanced, that you are not taking advantage of the other person. And sometimes we forget to see that there is that balance because we want to get to the bottom line. So it's important to learn to check in. When we look at these issues, you spoke about fear, you spoke about pride, there are these things involved. So why is there fear in a relationship, in any kind of relationship? When we look at the community approach, we are starting to have a little bit more education about bullying and anti-bullying campaigns in schools. So we start to see and we start to teach the younger generations, you don't speak like that, you don't address people like that, you don't take advantage of people in that manner. So in 15, 20 years, we'll see the results of these things. We'll see the results of adding meditation into the schools. But you can see from one school to another, and you've seen it in one part of the community to another. How do we speak to each other? How do we address each other? So when you look at sexual violence, emotional violence, you can start seeing that in how your partner addresses you. Does your partner address you with respect? Does your partner not? Does that person use language that is hurtful to you? Does your partner bully you? And do you realize that this is bullying, or do you feel like, well, this is how this person talks, you know? And so we have to realize that if you don't feel respect, or you don't feel like you have an opinion, or you cannot express yourself freely, you have to start second guessing at that point. And unfortunately, we have this history where we start not with domestic violence, but with partner violence. So people as young as first and second form are in emotionally abusive relationships. And so if your first relationship, you are getting called names, you are being disparaged, you are being told, you know, nobody else would go out with you because you're really ugly. And these kinds of harmful things, you grow up with that. So when your partner doesn't do that, it's outside of your norm. You become normalized to expect the violence. You become normalized to feeling like an obligation to do things within the relationship. And that's not what relationships are, but who knows that?
I wanted to just clarify though, because I think the employer-employee relationship would be distinctly different from a relationship between two people, because wouldn't they, I mean, ideally you come into a relationship as equals. An employer has a different power structure over you. So the issue of controlling behavior, I think, my question is looking at, it starts almost subliminal, doesn't it? Like you don't realize you're being controlled until you start to exhibit those feelings of fear. Like maybe I can't post this online because it'll get my partner upset, or maybe I can't talk to Isani because, you know, my partner is watching.
Or, you know, I can't play this kind of music because it reminds my partner of when we were in this bad relationship. It's even those little things. I can't cook this food, I can't wear this outfit. It's looking at those rules that you have taken on that are unspoken rules, that are things that are limiting you.
Or sometimes told by the partner too.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and that's the point that I wanted to, you know, in terms of whenever we talk about control, we have to look at it as once it violates a person's rights, then we already begin to see it is wrong. I see control often as a way of retaining that power, and so in of itself, control is mostly almost 100% negative, because it's used to retain that power. One, we are talking about messages and we're talking about what we say. Those messages have been handed to us, and that's where the gender aspect of it comes in, with the socialization, and how we are bringing up men and women, and what are the things that we tell them, and that kind of causes us to accept certain things within relationship, because it is the expectation that that's how each of them should behave. In terms of men, if they're more in touch with their own feelings, and they're, you know, it's not seen as something that is very manly. In terms of women, you know, it's a sense of submissiveness and lack of power to make their own decisions, because they're seen as the weaker sex. So those are the types of messages at the very bottom that we often don't even know when we're actually exhibiting
Yeah.
them. And then it kind of permeates relationships.
Yeah.
And when we are unable to communicate with one another, when we're unable to accept that that person is an independent person who can make their own decisions, I don't like them, I don't agree with them, but that's their own decisions, and as adults we need to respect that. That's where the violence comes in, because it has to retain that power and control.
Go ahead.
A lot of, I go back to corporal punishment and the acceptance. And I can say this from studies that I've done, research. I remember doing a research for violence against children. And kids told us in those, we did countrywide, you know, it's acceptable if your mother curses you, your dad. If I do something wrong, I should get spanking.
Yeah.
It got even more alarming when I did a study for, it wasn't just particularly for violence, but as a part of the study, I had to do that. And I remember talking to grown women, and they say, if food wasn't on the table and my husband hits me, that's acceptable. You know, it's okay. And so I was one of the most enlightened persons when I did those studies. But I also looked at corporal punishment when it was in schools, and I said, they took it out, they didn't replace it with something effective.
Yeah.
When I became a parent, I made a conscious decision. I grew up being told, you know, they curse you, and it was acceptable. Your neighbors heard it, nobody worried.
Yeah.
Nobody worried. And I made a conscious decision because I was educated, I understood, I learned about classical conditioning, all the fancy things you did in psychology. I teach sociology. And I said, no, I'm going to try this differently. But I also realized it was a decision I had to make with my husband. How are we going to parent? Because both of us came from families that were upstanding, but we both learned, we knew punishment, and we did well.
Yeah.
But what were we going to accept for ourselves? And so we had to sit down and parent. I don't think a lot of people sit down and talk about parenting. That's stupid.
Yeah.
It's as silly as telling somebody go to counseling. If a man and a woman has a quarrel and you tell him go do some counseling, like, why do I need to go? Are you? We're not Americans. We're believing all that.
There's this notion that only crazy people seek that kind of assistance.
So at 16, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and you know, a lot of people still criticize how we parent. She's allowed to speak up. And I always tell my daughter, you can say whatever you want, but do it respectfully.
With respect.
Yes, and you're listened. She's acknowledged in her peers. She's acknowledged by the teachers because she does. But it had to be a decision. Yes, I can say I didn't grow up like that. My husband was used to spanking for everything. He couldn't even say something in his family. So we learn and we don't replicate. And a lot of times people are in situations because they don't have the information, they replicate what they know. That's all they know. They've been conditioned to do that, and that's all they know. And we have not touched that part of it.
Yeah.
We're fixing the surface. We are seeing the results of all of that, and we go and treat that part of it.
It's a deep-seated issue.
And I think that is, thank you, because that's going to lead us into our next segment. And so we'll take a quick break, but I think it really is important for us to explore some of the beliefs and values that we have as a society that is contributing to the problem that we see with gender-based violence. So we'll take a break, and we're going to attempt to tackle that in the next segment. Please stay tuned.
Belize Bank's Christmas Flexi Loans are here. Let us help you to cover all your Christmas expenses this Christmas.
we're back, and if you're just joining us, we are continuing our conversation with our panel. We are talking about the launch of 16 Days of Activism, specifically about fighting against gender-based violence. We have with us on set Cynthia Williams, who is the Executive Director of the National Women's Commission. In the middle, we have Dr. Charmaine Saunders, who's the President of Haven House. And on the end, we have mental health counselor Amy Jacks. Good morning. And let's keep it all going. So before the break, we were talking about a number of issues, and we really kind of honed in on one specific area, which is where do the innate circumstances within us come from? Or what are some of the things that we are growing up seeing and being normalized of that allow us to still have this issue of gender-based violence? And I want you all individually to weigh in on what you think it is that we need to start to build a counterculture for to see the change that we want.
I think for me, in terms of the work that, working in this sector for a couple of years now, I think one of the areas that we need to strengthen, we need to work more is in terms of engagement of men. Because we have for so many years, the focus has been a lot on the victims and survivors. And part of the prevention aspect has to come the engagement of men. And I say that because most times, perpetrators are men. And so if we want to be able to change the narrative, we want to be able to change the messages, we have to engage men. Often when I say this, the response is kind of uncomfortable and resistant, because at the end of the day, men are privileged in our society. And so often that privilege kind of allows certain behaviors to be accepted or to be expected, and we need to challenge those behaviors. With privilege comes responsibility, and that is something that we hear all the time. And so we need to be able to engage men to help them really look at those behaviors, the attitudes and norms that society also cultivates in them, and to see how we can move beyond that. That step will take a long time, but we need to be able to start. And there has been attempts in the past where we engage men to look at, not in a confrontational manner, but rather how does that behavior also limit you? How does perpetration of violence and the behaviors that we speak of limit men from actually engaging with in their relationships more fully, engaging within their families and the raising of their children in a more productive and sustainable way for their families. So for me, I think that's one of the areas that we need to really address and would definitely help in the work that needs to be done.
I agree. I remember, I think about 5 years ago, my daughter asked me, "Mommy, if you're doing all this work for women, who will save the boys?" And I said, "Girl, I can't save the boys." I mean, I didn't know how. And that was a 16 days of activism. That was the first year she went with me, and she took 16 students with her, and she had 14 boys. And I looked around, and they were the only boys at the event, the launch of the 16 days of activism. And all throughout her high school years, those boys, even at the launch of our 5K run on Saturday, those boys are still coming with her. And I realized maybe I was not seeing something, and I think that's also, we are the ones who do the advocacy work. We haven't included the youths. I think that's also lacking, because she was probably 11 when she told me that, and I didn't think about that. I mean, I do the wrongs, I go on the talk show, and I remember a man saying, "Well, miss, you," at one of the local radio stations, he said, "But I am being abused, so where do I go?" And I couldn't tell him, "Well, go to the men's department." I couldn't.
Because there is none.
And he was sincere. It wasn't a joke. It was something that he was experiencing. Now more so, I am seeing also same-sex relationships, and they come to Haven House and they anticipate that we will take them too, but our purview doesn't allow that. So it's a mix of a lot of things, but I think that we have to include young people as part of this whole work, because they too understand, they have solutions. I mean, I listened to the child parliamentary sitting and I'm amazed.
Yeah.
So
that
here's
these
my
kids
next
have
here's my
solutions.
next question, and I'm glad that you alluded to the fact that you now have the prevalence of same-sex relationships, right? But it would seem as if though perhaps your rules of engagement, for want of a better expression, are antiquated. That you're not looking at
Yeah.
what those new developments are in terms of relationships. It's no longer heterosexual in a strict manner. It's now, you know, same-sex and other forms. A male is in a relationship with another male, and there is violence.
Yes.
That person has no respite. There's no way or nowhere that individual can turn to. Now, if you look at it from another point of view, you have two females in a relationship. There's also physical and other forms of abuse.
Absolutely.
Can that individual turn to
No,
Haven
and
House?
that's why
It
I
still
am,
can't.
and that is an area, and you're right. We are antiquated in the way we approach, antiquated in the way our laws, antiquated in the way we advocate for our laws to be changed. And if we don't say it, and when we say it, we're definitely going to be criticized for saying it. But what are we doing about it? Absolutely, we've put it on the table before. Particularly because our agency was looking at continuum of care, not just when you get them out and you have them in, what happens on the continuum of care. We cannot provide that service, but we have to link with somebody else who can. And it's been years now we've had same-sex relationship, maybe only in this, you'd think only in the sense of two female, but we've had transgender relationships that have contacted us. We can only provide an alternate solution to them, but it's not inclusive. We're not integrated either.
Right. And that's why the issue of gender-based violence is a developmental issue. It's a development issue. It is not a woman's issue. And we have to approach it that way. And you rightly said, things have evolved, things have changed. In Belize, like many other countries, we have not evolved with that. And we will get a lot of you know, people will not like us saying that because of our own, you know, even in terms of faith perspectives that as a country we hold very close. But we have to understand that when it comes to ensuring that people's rights, that people are protected and people are provided with the options and resources that they need, we need to move beyond that. The government is the duty bearer, and so there needs to be certain strategies that need to be addressed. And so we have the National Gender-Based Violence Transactions that looks at even trying to understand what is the reality within those contexts, because we don't know. What is the reality even in terms of elder abuse, where we're finding a lot of cases of elderly abuse, sexual elderly abuse. And so those things are not even brought to the forefront, because then if we barely want to talk about sexual abuse of children and young people, much less of elder abuse, sexual abuse, because then in our minds, in our culture, old people are supposed to have sex. So those are the conversations, and these are the challenges that we need to bring within the sector for us who work within it to be able to be always on the cusp of what needs to happen, but also ensure that we have that conversation with everybody, parents. So we need to include education system, because they have a lot of contact with parents. So it's being able not to recreate the wheel, but being able how to use those spaces that already exist and bring them to the table. The issue of health, a lot of people go to health, but do we even link issues of gender-based violence to health? We don't. I mean, Dr. Charmaine really brought an important point that we don't know if there's any correlation, but in my mind there is.
And
because
cancer can be stress-induced.
exactly. So definitely we have to look at all those areas.
So, just, you know, I think that it's important that we close off with something that the viewers will be able to adapt or change or at least reflect on. We know, and we didn't even get a chance to talk about it, we know that as a society we tend to be very judgmental of people who are caught up in cycles of gender-based violence, whether it is physical domestic violence, whether it is a victim of rape or sexual assault. And even when we look at people with psychological and emotional abuse, we just don't understand it. What do we need to do on an individual basis? What do you think will help in us being able to become a society that will be more responsive in a way that we can change the situation?
My first thought is treat people how you want to be treated. That's the premise of my marriage.
Yeah.
I told my husband, you can't embarrass me because just out of shame, I'll do it back to you, you know. So I think it's basically, and that's, I mean, that is within your span of control. How would you want to be treated? If I do something wrong, you don't like to be yelled at, why would you yell at me?
Yeah.
And it calls you to do some restraint. You have to be restrain yourself from doing it because in the heat of the moment you may want to react. And another thing is saying sorry. I think we don't like to say sorry. It's as hard as, to me, saying sorry is as simple as saying good morning, which we all grew up. But now, you know, the world is changing. We don't say good morning as we used to, but I think saying sorry also helps because you take some ownership of your behavior. You are not responsible for other people's behavior, but within your span of control, you have that much that you can do, which is, and I just say it's simple. Treat people how you want to be treated and say sorry. It takes nothing. If it took weight off me, I would be very slim right now. Just say sorry, and that would be that first inroad into healing, you know.
Amy?
Empathy was actually my go-to response as well. When you put yourself in that person's situation, would you be judgmental? When you put yourself in that person's situation, would you speak to that person in that way? And it's the same thing. When you look at it from your own perspective, how can you deal with it differently? And that I feel is what we don't do. We judge, like what you said. We look on as, well, that's not what is happening in my situation. That's their world, not mine. But when you actually see yourself in that situation, what would you do?
I think for me, and it kind of, you know, for us to be able to get that, you need to be able to become involved. You need to become aware. You need to understand. Often because we don't understand, we judge. Because we don't know, we do not become advocates for people. And an advocate can be anyone. If someone just needs to know what is the process for you to go and make a report at the police station, what is the process to become, you know, access services at the human development as a ministry as a whole. So definitely you need to be able to do that. And I know we never got a time, but today is a perfect opportunity. As part of 16 days, we will be having a community fair at the IT Vet, starting at 9 in the morning. Up to like 2 o'clock, where we have a group of agencies, government and non-government, speaking about what is it that they offer, what is it that they can do for people. And definitely that is the first step, because if we don't know what exists, we wouldn't be able to do that. Like I said, today is the launch of 16 Days of Activism, just the official launch. And it's always good to bring people together, because you can sometimes get tired in this line of work. You can get frustrated. And so it's important whenever we have these type of events to kind of pick up our, say, you know, let's go again, like pick up our drive. And so that's why we do the launch on a yearly basis. So it's often the criticism, oh, you only appear on morning shows. No, we do work throughout the year, and you know, even in terms of this particular instance, to challenge the media stations, to really and openly say, what is your role? What is it that you can do to also be a part of the discussion and reducing actions that perpetrate violence? And so we hope that we have a calendar. People want a copy of it with activities through all partners. We can send it to them electronically so that they are aware of what is going on in their districts. And they can also have activities on their own. This is not something that is owned by government. Anyone can come together in their community and say, you know, I want to do this activity. How can we help? How can we be a part of it?
All right. Well, thank you for coming in. This is just a slight spark as to what we hope will take place within workplaces, within households, just to get the conversation started. What are we facing with gender-based violence? What is our individual role, and what can we do differently to change it?
And Marlene, very quickly, because I will be remiss if I don't say it, because we have one particular activity that we're doing tomorrow, which is the Men's Barbershop Forum, in partnership with the Spouses of the Caribbean Leaders Action Network, SLAN. And so we bring 70 men coming together to engage them, hear what is it that, in terms of what is fatherhood, what is masculinity, which is an issue that often we don't talk about as well. And so at the end, we hope to be able to get from them, what are some of the things, what are your needs? And maybe choose one or two that we can say, let's try and do something about it.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in.
Thank you too.
We're going
as
to
well.
go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back in a few. Please stay tuned. And we're back, and we're moving into our second conversation for today. There's some interesting developments taking place as we have representatives of the Jamaican Stock Exchange with us talking about possibilities in our finance sector. We have with us to tell us all about it Ishmael Kiros, who is the Executive Director of the Economic Development Council. We have in the middle Marlene Street Forrest, who is the Managing Director of the Jamaican Stock Exchange. And on the end, we have Ian McNaughton, who is the Chairman of the Jamaica Stock Exchange. Good morning, and welcome.
Good morning, Marlene. Thanks for having us.
Okay, so we don't regularly have conversations about stock markets here in Belize. So this is very new for us. And I want to, start off with the Belize perspective, Ishmael, to talk about what we are aiming to do in having these guests with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marlene and Isani, for having us. As you might know, the finance sector development and the deepening of that system is definitely on the Economic Development Council's radar of business climate reforms. For far too often, we've heard that access to finance or access to affordable finance is a constraint to growth in Belize, and especially growth for the business sector. And so therefore, we're thinking of non-traditional instruments that may be available. We've had some examples of municipal bonds being floated, so there's an appetite for that and a new interest. And so together with the International Financial Services Commission and the Ministry of Finance, the EDC is hosting this delegation by the Jamaica Stock Exchange for us to learn from their experience, as well as to kind of figure out some opportunities that might exist for Belizean business.
Yeah. Now, before we talk about what's happening in Jamaica, what has been the response since you first issued invitations for people to participate in this consultation phase?
There's been tremendous interest right across the board from public and private sector.
Yeah.
From the private sector's perspective, there is this persistent issue of excess liquidity in the system. I think people want to invest. They want to grow, but perhaps they don't necessarily want to be indebted by taking out loans. But there are alternatives, there are options, and so perhaps you can provide a portion of your business in the form of shares. And so there's an interest there. From the public sector side, there is interest knowing that there are things that we need to have in place before we can actually go that route. And so it's important for us to talk about it together and move forward in getting all the pieces in place.
Yeah. Well, Marlene and Ian, I think, this is really an introduction to the Belizean public about the stock exchange in Jamaica and a financial structure that we're not really accustomed to. What's the first thing you would say to them in being able to explain how it works?
Okay, so the stock exchange operates a stock market or several markets where companies who want to raise funds can come to the market in an orderly way and approach investors who want to invest in these companies. And it is through a regulated framework so that persons, after they have done that, can also trade these securities on the secondary market.
Yeah. Now, the Jamaica Stock Exchange is, how long has it been running?
Actually celebrating 50 years this year. This year, so we've been around.
Yeah. And you are actually listed as one of the most successful stock exchange systems.
Yes, so we are the best performing exchange in 2018 and also 2015. And currently we are among the top 4 in terms of best performing exchange in the world.
And what do you credit for that success?
Mainly the regulatory framework and the fact that persons have been introduced to equity capital and have seen how it has really revolutionized their businesses, and investors are benefiting as well. We also, in terms of the economic climate, it is it's sound, and people understand that there is confidence if they invest in companies, that these companies will provide a good return on investment.
When you look at a small country like Belize, in comparison to where Jamaica is in terms of having a robust stock exchange system, what are some of the things that we can learn or take away from a very basic level to be able to perhaps begin to establish our own systems?
The first thing really is that there needs to be education. There needs to be a public education initiative which enables people to understand what the stock exchange is, what it offers, and how they can participate. So that's the first step. The second step really is to ensure that it's properly managed and properly regulated. And once that's in place and people have the confidence that, you know, this is not a, I hate to use a bad word, Ponzi scheme, you know, the confidence will grow and the market will grow.
Yeah, yeah. You know, that's really what I wanted to dive in on, because you mentioned three things, Marlene, which I think is important, and I wanted to separate. One was looking at the regulations. Right. You have to have the proper structure in place.
That is correct.
For it to be accountable, transparent, and especially when people are putting money, they want to know that it's safe.
Right.
What are some of the perhaps innovative regulations that you've established? You know, we in the Caribbean, we do things a bit different sometimes. Well, how have you been able to allay the fears of investors that the stocks that they purchased are actually going to be worthwhile?
Okay, so the stock exchange is a self-regulatory organization. So we have an independent regulatory and market oversight committee of the board, and we also have a regulatory and market oversight division that report directly to the independent members of the board. So that gives that governance and confidence in the market. Then we are regulated by a Financial Services Commission. That's a government entity. So there are various levels of regulation, and the stock exchange itself now regulates both the listed companies and the brokers that operate within the market. So there is so many areas of regulation that people begin to feel comfortable. But not only is it that there is the regulatory framework, but we actually regulate.
Yes. And the independence and autonomy
that
of your regulation bodies. That's important as well.
That's very important. Very important.
In addition to that, also integrity of the transparency of the system, right? Individuals will be able to determine exactly how the movement of the stock prices are, you know, are happening. So when you have a system that actually has very good price discovery, transparency in movement of prices, all the other pertinent information that is required for people to make informed decisions, you then get a confidence level which allows people to understand that, look, you know, this is for real.
At a very basic level, once again, why is a stock exchange beneficial to any potential investor? How would you sell that idea to the average Belizean who is a business person or who looks to finances and the financial sector but may not necessarily know fully how stock exchange works?
Okay, so let me say that when a company comes to market to raise especially equity capital, I want to focus on that. Equity capital, and that is a share in the business. It's patient capital. So the company that looks to raise equity capital knows that when I get this money, I'm able to now continue to use it in terms of the promotion of my business, productivity, and wait, and the shareholders will wait until that company is doing well, either to get dividend, but then there is also the increase in the share price for the investor. But the company itself has that window within which to grow.
And you know, this is clearly when you put it in that light, it shows where the opportunities can exist for Belizean businesses. How does the success of the Jamaica Stock Exchange impact the economy of Jamaica?
Well, it is the fostering of robust or mobilization of capital. And once capital is mobilized in order for the businesses to use that, then it lends itself to the growth of the economy. More jobs are created, more taxes for the government, and it rises everybody's the level of the economy.
And in addition to that also, because you are listed on an exchange, there are certain requirements in terms of governance, which are required. Now that actually ensures that the companies are better managed,
yes,
and prevent fallout in terms of companies that are actually so much better managed that the risk of bankruptcy or other negative issues are reduced.
If I could add to that, when on that matter of better management, both in terms from a regulatory perspective as well as at the business level, at the company level, there is that much more heightened efficiency and productivity within companies. Once there's that oversight, there's checks and balances, there's audited, financial statements that are required to ensure all your investors or all your shareholders that you are being properly managed.
Yeah.
That contributes to growth. So businesses can grow more, hire more people, and in return, the government benefits from taxation.
In addition to that also, because you're better managed as an organization, financing institutions will look more favorably at you because you are better managed. You have audited financials, which they have visibility on. So the whole infrastructure becomes better if you are
so
listed.
if there were a situation where you would need access to capital, the fact that you have your house in order,
that
so
is
to speak,
correct.
allows you to be able to...
Exactly.
And very importantly, it might enable access to more affordable finance because there's reduced risk.
Right.
That's also beneficial to the entire banking sector because as you reduce the risk of, having people not repay loans, everybody benefits.
So let's talk about benefits for investors, because that's also part of the attraction of it as well. While businesses may be able to raise capital by selling the shares, what's the attraction for investors?
Quite a number of advantages. One is that companies that are listed pay dividend out of profit. And what we have found in terms of the Jamaican experience, most of our companies pay dividend. Then there is the price appreciation, meaning when the companies do well, the price of the shares tend to go up. And that again is a benefit for that investor if he wants to sell those shares. For Jamaica, there is no tax on that capital gain. So investors can take that just off the top.
Is that as a form of an incentive, or is it an incentive to stimulate more investment, or it's just that there isn't any tax regime on it?
Well, because of the fact that we want to develop the capital market, the government, because that is a government-driven program, the government has indicated that there would be no tax on capital appreciation. And on dividend, the tax is also reduced.
In addition to those benefits also, there is the benefit of diversification of your investments. Right? It's never good to have all the eggs in one basket. So this provides another source of investment opportunity for investors.
So this visit is twofold, I understand. One, you are perhaps looking and discussing with private and public entities about the feasibility of establishing a stock exchange in Belize. What are some of the first things you want to be looking at?
Well, when we incorporated the stock exchange in Jamaica, I want to go there. One of the things is that we engaged the financial sector and all the authorities, for example, the central bank, the securities dealers, if there are those. And so you engage those in order to ensure that when you are developing your market, you have all the stakeholders together. Obviously, you're going to engage with investors as well, or potential investors. So those are some of the things that we look for.
And what makes, when you look at a small country like Belize, what would make some of the necessary requirements or necessary steps that would have to be taken before the establishment of a stock exchange?
What would make?
What would be necessary? Is it about getting the regulations in place first? Is it the buy-in from companies that would want to be listed? Is it a study as to who'd be interested to be investors?
You have to do all of those. You have to do all of those. Regulation is key. Because confidence is important in a market. So the regulation is key. However, what you really need to do is to start engaging. You have to start engaging your brokers as well as the investors and the companies.
Yes.
Because the companies are, they're the ones that are going to offer the securities. So you want to ensure that they have a buy-in, and you want to ensure that they have their house in order in order to issue shares. Yeah. Very, very important. We found in Jamaica that what we did was to engage those companies, see where they are in terms of readiness to issue shares on the market, and to assist them along that path.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, as I said, it's twofold. The second part of your visit is also exploring companies in Belize to list on the Jamaican Stock Exchange.
Yes, insofar as you have companies that want to raise capital, Belize is a part of CARICOM.
Yes.
And our rules are so drafted that CARICOM companies can raise funds within Jamaica or can just list, because you do not have to necessarily raise funds to list. You can also list on the Jamaica Stock Exchange on any of the markets that we have.
Yeah.
So we have the main market, the junior market, the US denominated market, and the bond market, and who knows too, one could also create a Belizean market. Yes.
So Ishmael, coming into this, has there been any expression of interest from any local businesses thus far?
Yes, indeed. As we mentioned previously, there's already precedents, so to speak, of businesses either issuing commercial paper or other instruments, or investing in bonds, and so there is interest. Primarily, it's some of the larger corporations in the country that have quite a lot of assets and liquidity, but that also want to diversify and have perhaps more return that would be able to do that in the first instance. And what's also interesting is the capacity building in terms of the skill set, more and more skill set of people, experts in the financial sector, who are popping up and really doing their thing in terms of educating, in terms of proving that this can work. Of course, it does need the framework, and therefore the central bank is also interested, as well as the other stakeholders. So there's quite a lot of interest from companies in broad cross-section.
You work with public entities too, or private? You started with private first and then included public?
Both.
Okay.
So the government, in terms of 1962, when we started the stock market as against the stock exchange, what we had 17 companies, and it was a mix of both government entities and private entities.
Okay.
So what the government did at that point is to entreat the private entities to issue 25% at that point of their shares to the public. And the government also privatized some of the companies across the market. So it was a mixture.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, what are the possibilities that exist here, Ishmael?
Some of the possibilities, I think there's the idea that a lot of very large companies may want to just put certain portions of their portfolio to the public to raise capital. And we've already heard from some stakeholders in the private sector that they're ready and willing to do this. They're already perhaps not benefiting from some of the investments that they're making in terms of not getting as much. And so there's definite interest. Some of the people that we will be meeting with over the course of today and tomorrow are perhaps going to actually come forward with some of their potential opportunities. And so we're looking out for that.
So if I'm a business owner and I'm paying attention to this and I'm trying to think, would I be fit for this? Would I be fit for the Jamaican Stock Exchange? Would I be ready to be able to put my company or parts of my company out there? What are some of the questions I need to ask myself?
You need to ask yourself whether you are comfortable in terms of sharing a part of your business. That's the first thing. In Jamaica, 20% of the company must be in the hands of not the original shareholders. And that's not a large part. It's not giving away your business. The other thing is you have to do an introspective look at governance. Are you ready now to share information with the market? How you are doing. But we find that the companies who have come forward to share information they have grown from it because what it does is put a spotlight on your company to do better. So
I mean, you know, my competitors are then going to see too, you know.
Yes, but even when the competitors see, the businesses still grow because of sustainability. Yes, so and we find that people become more and more comfortable in sharing this information, actually seeing it as a sense of pride. Because as soon as you are listed on the exchange, that each day for us in Jamaica, that company's name is on the lips of people. How are they doing? You know, and it gives them that visibility that advertisement could not have bought. So the companies tend to, those are some of the things, they have to look at their books and records, right? How, you know, their financial statements, because that it will be a requirement for them to publish quarterly their financial results, and on an annual basis, their audited financial. But that governance structure is very good for business and the growth of business.
Okay. So for anyone watching who wants to figure out where they can be a part of the consultations that are coming up, Ishmael, how do they get in touch?
So we've partnered with, as I mentioned, the International Financial Services Commission, as well as the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We'll be hosting our meetings today, in particular at the Central Bank. So there's going to be a lot of information out there. We do have a press release to follow based on the outcomes of the discussions. But the Chamber of Commerce would be an ideal source of information in terms of some of the opportunities that arise. There's going to be various events for broader consultation with the private sector. And so we can look forward to a lot of information, us providing that, as well as the Chamber sharing it, and that'll be forthcoming.
And after this visit of this delegation, what do you foresee to be the next step?
So some of the things that we want to take note of coming out of the discussions today are the key considerations that we need to bear in mind in terms of the regulations, the laws that we need to have in place, perhaps the capacity building within, for example, the security trading sector, as well as education and awareness. And so we would certainly want to keep pushing that, to keep working towards financial sector development in the broader sense of things, and very particular looking at tax reform. Which is, you know, still the hot button topic that is needed, because that's also needed to promote and encourage the system to work. So we'll be working on it.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in and giving us just a beginner's look at what possibilities may lay ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
We're going to go ahead and take that final break now, and when we come back, we'll have our wrap up, so stay tuned. And we're back. Very interesting show today.
Two totally different topics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, we are completely out of time, but we do want to remind you that today is the launch of the 16 Days of Activism. There is a community fair taking place at the IT Vet. You can check that out as of 9 a.m. this morning. See what the different agencies are doing. We really encourage you to take some time to think about our own individual roles in what's happening within our society. We all are very disturbed when we hear of crimes that are related to gender-based violence. It all starts sometimes with the conversations that we're having amongst ourselves, the conversations we're having with our children, and start thinking about what we need to be doing differently and start executing that today.
Well said, Marlene.
Yeah. And also thank you to the representatives from the Jamaica Stock Exchange and also Ishmael Kiras from the Economic Development Council talking about the possibilities, exploring the possibilities of a stock exchange in Belize.
That being said,
yeah,
all great things must come to an end.
All right, so if you want to contact us, send us an email at oye@channel5belize.com. You can drop me a line at marlene_oye@channel5belize.com. Find us on Facebook at Open Your Eyes BZ and on Instagram at OYE Belize. And remember to tune in tomorrow morning at 6:30 when you open your eyes.
Start your morning right.
Until then, keep your eyes, your mind,
and your hearts open.
See you soon. Enjoy your day, Belize.
Open Your Eyes was brought to you by the Belize Bank. Our country, your bank.